Hi, here we are for Babe the Gallant Pig, Chapter 10. I like this chapter, so I went ahead a little. Memorize it. Because Babe had now saved the flock not only from the rustlers, but also from the worriers, the Hoggets could not do too much for him. Because he was a pig, though Farmer Hoggett increasingly found himself thinking of Pig as dog and fed him accordingly, they gave him unlimited supplies of what they supposed he could not have too much of, namely food. Because he was strong minded and reveled in his newfound speed, he ate sparingly of it. Because there was always a lot left over, Fly became fat, and the chickens chubby, and the ducks dumpy, and the very rats and mice rolled happily about the stables with stomachs full to bursting. Mrs. Hoggett even took to calling Babe to the back door to feed him some tidbit or other, though she thought he might particularly like, and from here it was but a short step to inviting him into the house, which one day she did. When the farmer came in for his tea, he found not only Fly, but Pig lying happily asleep beside the stove. And afterwards, when he sat down in his armchair in the sitting room and switched on the television, Babe came to sit beside him, and they watched the 6 o'clock news together. He likes it, said Hoggett to his wife when she came into the room. Mrs. Hoggett nodded her head to a great many times, as usual, and had a few words to say on the subject. Dear little chap, though you can't call him little no longer, he's grown so much. Why, he's big enough to you know what. Not that we ever shall now. Over my dead body, though. I hopes it ain't, if you know what I mean. Just look at him. We should have brought him into the house long ago. No reason why not, is there now? Well, he might mess the carpet, said Farmer Hoggett. Never, cried Mrs. Hoggett, shaking her head the entire time that she was speaking. He's no more likely to mess than he is to fly. He'll ask to go out when he wants to, just like a good, clean dog would. Got more brains than a dog, he has. Why, wouldn't surprise me to hear he was rounding up them old sheep out in the yard. Wouldn't honestly, though I suppose you'd think I'm daft. Farmer Hoggett grinned to himself. He did not tell his wife what she had never yet noticed, that all the work on the farm was now being done by the sheep pig, and he had no intention of telling her of the final part of his plan, which was nothing less than to enter Pig in the sternest of all tests, the Grand Challenge Sheepdog Trials, open to all comers. Never in his working life had he owned an animal good enough to compete in these trials. Now at last he had one, and he was not going to be stopped from realizing his ambitions by the fact that it was a pig. In a couple of weeks they would be the competition against the best sheepdogs in the country would be appearing, in fact, on the very television screen that they were now watching. No, you're not daft, he said. But you won't get half a surprise when you sit here and watch it, he thought, and so will a lot of other folks. His plan was simple. He would appear at the Grand Challenge trials with Fly, and at the last possible moment swap her for Pig. By then it would be too late for anyone to stop him. It didn't matter what happened afterwards. They could disqualify him, fine him, send him to prison, anything, as long as he could run Pig. Just one glorious run, just to show them all. And they couldn't say that he hadn't been warned. They hadn't been warned. The name was there on the entry form. He had been worried, for he was a truthful man, and the heading might say name of dog, and then whatever he put in would be a lie. But he'd been lucky. It said name of competitor, the form said, F. Hoggett. Name of entry, Pig, the simple truth. Shepherds usually give their dogs short names like Jip or Moss, and it's so much quicker than yelling Bartholomew or Wilhelmina. And though someone might say Pig, that's a funny name, no one in their wildest dreams would guess that it was the truth. The 2 weeks before the Grand Challenge trials were 2 weeks of concentrated activity. Apart from Mrs. Hoggett, who as usual was busy with household duties, everyone now knew what was going on. To begin with, Hoggett altered the practice course, cutting out all the frills like the plank bridge over the stream, and he built a new course as close as possible to what he thought they might face on that day. As soon as Fly saw this, she became convinced that what she had suspected was actually going to happen, and she told the sheep, with whom she now was on speaking terms. Every night, of course, she and Babe talked endlessly about the coming challenges before they settled to sleep, in the stables still, though the Hoggets would have been perfectly happy for Babe to sleep in the house, so well-mannered was he. Thoughtful as ever, Babe was anxious, not about his own abilities, but about his foster mom's feelings. He felt certain she would have given her dog teeth to compete in the national trials, the dream of every sheepdog. Yet she must sit and watch him. Are you sure you don't mind, Mum? He asked. Fly's reply was as practical as ever. Listen, babe, she said. First of all, it wouldn't matter whether I minded or not. The boss is going to run you, no doubt of it. Second, I'm too old and too fat. And anyway, I'm I was only ever good enough for small local competitions. And lastly, I will be the happiest collie in the whole world if you win, and you can win. Do you really think so? I'm sure of it, said Fly firmly, but all the same she was anxious too, about one thing. She knew that the sheep pig, speedy as he was now, would still be much slower than the dogs, especially on the outrun. But equally she was confident that he could make this up by the promptness with which the sheep obeyed his requests. Here at home they shot through gaps or around obstacles as quick as a flash, never putting a foot wrong. The ones to be shed dashed out of the ring like lightning, and at the final petting they popped in the instant the boss opened the gate. But this was here at home. What would strange sheep do? How would they react to Babe? Would he be able to communicate with them in time? For there would be no time to waste. She was determined to ask the flock, and one evening when Babe and the boss were watching television, she trotted off up the hill. Since that first time when she had been forced to speak to them, they no longer cried wolf at her. Now they gathered around attentively at her first words. They were careful and polite. Good evening, Supply. I wonder if you would be kind enough to help me. I have a little problem. And she explained it, speaking slowly and carefully, for sheep are silly, and she said to herself, and no one will ever persuade her otherwise. You see what I mean, she finished. There they'll be, those strange sheep, and I'm sure they'll do whatever he tells them, or asks them, eventually. But it'll take all that time explaining things. The last creature they'll be expecting to see is a pig, and they might just bolt at the sight of him before he even gets a chance to speak to them. Password, said several voices. What do you mean? Fly said. Password, 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 said many voices, speaking slowly and carefully. For wolves are silly, they said to themselves. Nobody will ever persuade them otherwise. What our babes got to do, said one, is to learn what us all learned when we were little lambs. 'Tis a saying, see, said another, as lambs do learn as their mothers' hooks. And then whatever we do, wherever we go, to the market, to another farm, we won't never come to no harm, as long as we do say the password. And if our babe does say that to them, why then there won't never run away. Fly felt her patience slipping, but she controlled herself, knowing how important this information should be. Please, she said quietly, please will you tell me the password? For a long moment the flock stood silent, the only movement a turning of heads as they looked at one another. Fly could sense that they were braving themselves to tell the age-old secret, to give away to a wolf, of all things, this treasured countersign. Then, 'tis for Babe, someone said, 'tis for his sake. Ah, they all said softly, ah, and then one voice began in a tone. I may be ewe, I may be ram, I may be mutton, may be lamb, but on the hoof or on the hook, I ain't so stupid as I look. Then by general consent they began to move away, grazing as they went. Is that it? Called Fly after them. Is that the password? And the murmur was, ah. But what does it mean? Said Babe that night when she told him. All that stuff about I may be you and the other words I don't understand. It doesn't make much sense to me. That doesn't matter, dear, said Fly. You just memorize it. It may make all the difference on the day. The end of chapter 10. Sorry, it's stuck.